measure of the sorts of things that you can expect. The first thing that you may get is a premonition. And that means that you know you're going to die. So before you get the diagnosis, you learn in a dream, maybe, or it suddenly comes to you that you're going to die soon.
This is the patients or the relatives?
No, the patients. The Dalai Lama says all of us know 2 years before we're going to die that we're going to die. So we're given that information. And if you look in his book to see how we know, he says two things, one of which I can understand slightly, and that is that our behavior changes. And the other is that our breathing changes. Well, I don't know what he means by that, but I can see that one's behavior may change. You may get the feeling that you're going to die, and then of course your behavior will change. But he says it's very common. In fact, it's everyone. We didn't find that. We felt it was not common, but not so rare that we couldn't pick up occasional cases of it. The next thing that happens is that a few weeks before you die, you get deathbed visitors. Now, what's a deathbed visitor? They are relatives who come to you, and they do it in a specific way. They may stand outside the room in which you're dying, or they may come into the room, and that's quite common. People you don't know, occasionally. Animals, not many. Sorry about that. Your cat or your dog is not going to come along. So it's mainly first-degree relatives. And we also found in our sample that spiritual beings were seen. Now, the spiritual beings behave slightly differently from the relatives. They tend to either wait outside the hospice, and they're seen through the window, or they may come to the door, and some of them come in. Now, I must point out that there's a big cultural element, because a paper published from the Bible Belt of America showed that angels were seen very commonly. Now, in our sample, only 3% of people saw angels, so it's much smaller over here. So I think there is this cultural component to it. At some moment, you realize you're going to die, and it hits you hard. We're not coming back, guys. This isn't a getting well process, it's a dying process. And that then leaves you in a very difficult position, because you've never come across that before. You've always had some control over something, you now don't. And so you have to start giving everything up. This is absolutely fundamental. You have to give up the fact that you're going to go on living. You have to give up your wife. You have to give up your cat and your dog. You have to give up your children, your family. You have to give up your house and your job. You've got to give up everything. And if you don't, you remain attached. Now, attachment is the most difficult thing when you're dying. If you could give everything up, you'd have a very smooth transition. You go from this pre-transition, where you're attached, to transition, which is a sort of intermediate one, to post-transition. And in post-transition, you in fact have given everything up. And you go more and more into the spiritual domain, which I've described to you. And it's just like that. Until at the end, you've lost your ego. You've lost that part of yourself which has differentiated you, and you become what's called non-dual. That means that you do, in fact, merge with the universe. You have already lost all your trappings of being a body and a person, and you've just got this non-duality which is merging with the greater cosmos behind. So the idea that you're going to retain a lot of the things that you have in this life when you go there. You know, I'm going to see my mum and say hi. Probably not, but you could see your mum, I don't know. But in fact, you will become universal. So that's what the data shows. And the data shows that if you don't give up all the things to which you're attached, then you have a very difficult process in dying, because you've got these two processes, the one of fusion with the greater beyond, the other pulling back into the limited. Do you see?
And what happens then when the dying is more difficult?
Yeah. Then you have what is called spiritual restlessness. It's not a pleasant state to be in, because you've got a lot of anxiety, and all the time you're being pulled back, you're being pulled back, you're being pulled back. It's not pleasant. So you ought to know this. So when you go into a hospice, you should have a lecture on the fact that you're going to give up everything. You, in fact, have one or two features. You lose your narrative self. You know, there's little bits of you that chats to yourself all the time. That goes. Next, you're always in the moment. You're not in the past, and you're not in the future. It doesn't mean anything to you. If you ask them what is the world, they say, well, it's here now, this is it. What about what it was like? It's not there, it doesn't exist. And same for the future, what's to come. So you're just in the moment. And the other thing is you're unbelievably happy, and you're also tending to be transcendent as well. Your persona is not in the narrative voice and here. It's that you have become non-dual. Is the sort of life you lead, does it influence in the way you die? Well, yes, it does, but you have to be very careful here, because we have accounts of people who've said it's all material. I'm just going to go into blackness, nothing.
And they say this beforehand.
Beforehand, that's their belief structure. And what is quite clear is that as they come into the death process, they've all given up that idea, and they all start looking forward to what's what's happening to them. And they don't say they don't believe in anything anymore. The sort of things they say, one woman who was absolutely sure that there was nothing there, kept on waking up from a coma saying, come on, get on with it, because I want to move on, do you see? And that was quite different from what her stance was. So if you have a strong belief in angels, will you see angels? Probably. That's what the south of North America shows, the Bible Belt. They show that. If you lead a good life, will it be different from a bad life? And I'm going to just reframe that a bit. If a good life means that you're not strongly centered in yourself, in other words, you're thinking about other people and doing things like that, then when you come to this phase of giving up, you can give up much more easily because you're not centered. The other thing is guilt, because guilt is something which holds up. People find it very difficult to give up their guilt. All those terrible things they did and they feel guilty about, they're very difficult to give up. And so if you think of somebody who's committed a lot of crimes and they feel guilty about it, then they'll have a lot of difficulty giving up. And so my colleagues ask me, what happens if you're a psychopath and have no guilt? I don't know. I've never seen a psychopath die, but I assume they may do it very easily. I don't know if they can give everything up. So it's going to be related, the quality of your life is going to be related to your capacity to give up. And this is going to be how self-centered you are. The more self-centered you are, the more difficult it's going to be to give it up.
The cliche we often find in movies and in literature that a good person has a good death and the bad guy has a bad death. Is this what you observed in your research?
How I've described it is arguing from death in normal people and death in people who have spiritual anxiety as they come up to death. So the people with spiritual anxiety are those, in fact, who are attached, and those who are free aren't. And so you can argue from that statement to, if you're loaded with guilt or unable to give up your persona or your possessions or anything, those are the people who are going to have a difficult death. So it sort of fits in a bit with literature, but not quite. It's absolutely with the Dalai Lama in the first part. And he says any culture which sweeps death under the carpet and can't acknowledge it is a society which is greedy, because you're collecting things and you're going to have it. You can be angry with people because it means it's fine to have enemies. And they are very self-centered because they're going to live on to eternity. And if you look at our culture, it's got strong components of that. So I think the way that we medicalize death, sweep it away, don't talk about it, is producing a culture that is exactly one in which we deny our responsibility. Look, every 100 years we're all going to be swept away like that, but yet we won't talk about this.